My son once said I was just background noise in his life, like the hum of a fridge, always there, always working, but never worth noticing. I laughed it off then, smiled like it didn't sting, but in truth, those words never left me. They settled in my chest like dust in sunlight, quiet, constant. I've cleaned hospital floors at midnight, bandaged strangers while skipping meals, and spent more nights praying for rent than sleeping. I didn't need praise. I just thought maybe, one day, my son would look at me and see more than a shadow. But I was wrong. And it took me 70 years, a garden, and a betrayal to finally understand. Some stories aren't about being thanked. They're about reclaiming what should never have been given away so easily. My name is Lorraine Parker. I'm 70 now. But this story doesn't start here. In the quiet house I call my own. It starts in the cramped 2-bedroom apartment where I raised my son Nolan on canned beans and second-shift paychecks. My husband, George, died in a warehouse accident when Nolan was just 8. One minute he was loading a pallet, the next, his heart just gave out. The funeral was on a Wednesday. By Friday, I was back at the clinic, tying on my nursing shoes like grief had a time limit. I worked nights at the ER, days at a senior center, and weekends doing private care for the kind of people who never remembered my name, but always remembered to complain. I missed school plays, I missed birthdays, but Nolan had shoes without holes and lunch money every day. He never saw the nights I boiled tea bags 3 times before tossing them, or how I washed my uniform in the sink because the laundromat ate quarters I didn't have. Still, I never expected gratitude. I thought love didn't need receipts. I clipped coupons, skipped meals, and sold my wedding ring just to pay for his college application fees. When he got accepted, I cried alone in the parking lot of the hospital. My hands were still sticky with antiseptic and someone else's blood, but I didn't care. That moment, that was mine. I thought maybe, just maybe, everything I'd given would mean something. He called less once he moved out, said he was busy, then later that he was just not the emotional type. That was fine. I didn't need long phone calls or birthday cards. I needed to believe I'd done right by him. I was proud when he got his MBA. I was prouder when he married Jade, sharp as a knife, polished like glass. She wore ambition like perfume and had that kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. At their wedding, I stood in the back corner. Nolan didn't introduce me to most of his friends. I wasn't part of the curated image, I guess. Still, I brought a gift. A photo album of his childhood, hand-labeled, each page wrapped in clear plastic. He never opened it. Jade said they were going minimalist and didn't need clutter. I took it home and slid it back under my bed. I kept working long after I should have stopped. My knees ached, my vision blurred, but I clocked in at 6 a.m. just like always. I cared for a woman with dementia who thought I was her sister, and I let her. Sometimes it's better to be seen as someone than not at all. Over the years, I saved what I could. A crumpled 5 here, a rolled up 10 there. Every Christmas, I made flan and tamales and sold them at the church lot. People lined up early. That money went into a coffee can hidden under the sink. My version of a retirement plan. Nolan never asked how I was, but when he called, it was usually because someone was sick, or they needed a last-minute babysitter, or he forgot how to cook the tamales I used to make. And I always showed up. Always. Not because I was obligated. Because I still believed, deep down, that love meant showing up even when it wasn't returned. I remember one winter, I think I was 63, my back gave out halfway through a shift. I couldn't stand straight, but I kept working. A patient's daughter asked why someone so old was still cleaning floors. I just smiled. Told her some of us don't get the luxury of stopping. Looking back, I realize I spent most of my life giving. Not just things, time, strength, pieces of myself I didn't know I could spare. And I gave quietly. Because that's what women like me were taught. Be useful, be quiet, don't expect applause. This isn't just my story, it's a revenge story, yes, but not the kind with yelling or fists. Mine is slow, quiet, like tea steeping too long, like a garden no one believes can bloom until it does. It's the kind of revenge that doesn't need noise to leave a mark. Because when someone spends their whole life giving and then one day realizes they were never truly seen, never truly valued, that's when something shifts. And for me, that shift didn't start with anger. It started with silence, the kind that presses against your ribs and tells you, never again. That silence started to grow the day I put in my final notice. I left the hospital without fanfare, just a quiet goodbye to the halls I had walked for decades. I sold the old sedan for scrap, bought a used hatchback with good tires and better AC. I packed up my apartment, donated half my belongings, and took out the coffee can. Inside was $80. Enough with my tiny inheritance from an old patient to put a down payment on a little house at the edge of town. Spanish tile, 2 rooms, a wild garden out back, the kind of place people drive past without looking twice. But I saw it, and I knew it was mine. For the first time in decades, I didn't belong to anyone. Not to a job, not to a child, just to myself. I signed the papers with a hand that had once held Nolan's through fevers, field trips, and funerals. And when I walked through that front door, I whispered one word, finally. It's strange, isn't it? How something as small as a key can feel heavier than a lifetime. Heavier, even, than regret. But this isn't the end. Not even close. Because while I finally had something of my own, it turns out I wasn't the only one who wanted it. And what came next? Well, let's just say my story had been quiet long enough. It was Christmas Eve when it happened. Florida winters don't give you snow, but they do give you stillness. That night, the air was cool and dry, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own thoughts. I had spent the morning rolling tamales, just like old times. Pork, chicken, cheese, wrapped in husks, steamed gently on the stovetop. The smell of cumin and masa filled my little kitchen. I hadn't made them in years, not since Nolan got married, but I thought maybe, just this once, I'd surprise them. I packed them carefully into a casserole dish, still warm, still soft, and added a bow on top. The drive to their house wasn't far, but I remember gripping the steering wheel tightly, like I needed to steady something in me. Nolan hadn't invited me. I told myself maybe they forgot, or maybe Jade assumed he had called. I made excuses the whole drive there. That's the funny thing about mothers. We'll forgive anything if it means holding on to hope. When I rang the doorbell, it was Jade who answered. She wore silk pajamas and held a glass of red wine like she was in a lifestyle magazine. "Oh, Lorraine," she said, surprised but not exactly thrilled. "We didn't know you were coming." I held up the dish and smiled. I brought tamales, just like Nolan liked when he was little. She didn't move to let me in. I stood there for a beat too long before Nolan's voice called out from inside. "Mom, that you?" He came around the corner in a sweater that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. His smile was tight, almost like it hurt. You really didn't have to. Still, they let me in. The house smelled like scented candles and pine cleaner. It was beautiful, immaculate, like a showroom. Everything matched. Everything gleamed. I placed the tamales on their granite countertop like it was an offering. Nolan leaned on the island, scrolling his phone, not even looking at me. "I made them fresh this morning," I said, trying to sound casual, just like old times. He glanced up, took one tamale, bit into it, chewed slowly. Then he looked at Jade, smirked, and said the words that have lived in me ever since. "These taste like rent food." I blinked. "Rent food?" He laughed. "Yeah, like the stuff people bring to potlucks when they're too broke to order catering. You know." Jade chuckled, not loud but sharp. The kind of laugh you try to hide behind your wine glass, but it cuts anyway. I stood there watching my son joke about the food I used to make to keep him full during his hungriest years. I used to wake up at 4 a.m. to pack his lunch. I skipped meals so he wouldn't have to. And now here he was, mocking it like it was something beneath him, beneath her. I said nothing, just folded the foil back over the dish and nodded. "We're trying to eat clean now," Jade added, almost like a dig. "But thank you." I stayed maybe 10 more minutes, just enough to smile through the ache in my stomach and pretend like I hadn't just been gutted. I walked out of that house with the tamales still warm and my heart colder than it had ever been. I cried in the car, not loud, just a slow leak, the kind that fogs your vision and makes you wonder how you got here, how something so small could hurt so deeply. I went home to my quiet villa, sat on the porch, and tried to tell myself I was overreacting, but I wasn't. I knew it. You know it too, don't you? Tell me in the comments if you've ever been laughed at by someone you raised, someone you loved more than yourself. Sometimes it's not the words they say, it's the way they don't flinch when they say them. Like your sacrifice was just noise to them, like you were never more than a shadow in their perfect lives. That night, I heated up the same tamales and ate them alone. They tasted better with silence than they did with smugness. I thought of all the birthdays I worked through to buy Nolan his first bike. The nights I rocked him through fevers, the calluses on my hands from scrubbing hospital floors for overtime. He used to look at me like I was his whole world. Now I was just a joke at his dinner table. But I didn't cry again after that. I sat in my reading chair, pulled out a notebook, and wrote one sentence. This house is mine, and I will never let them take it. I didn't know what that meant yet. I didn't have a plan. But for the first time in a long while, I had a boundary, and I wasn't going to let it be crossed. The next morning, I looked out at my garden. The roses were bare for winter, just branches and memory, but I knew they'd bloom again, even after being stripped, even after the cold. So would I. The pain of being dismissed, of being humiliated by the very person you sacrificed everything for. It doesn't leave easily, but it can become something else. It can become the seed of a different story. I stood there, tea in hand, watching the frost melt off the grass, and I told myself quietly, this isn't how it ends. This is where it begins. And from that day forward, I started listening closer. Not to what they said, but to what they didn't. 3 months passed since that Christmas Eve. I didn't call Nolan, and he didn't call me. I told myself that was fine. Distance can be a kindness when love turns sharp. I spent my mornings in the garden, pruning the roses, planting new bulbs for spring. My house smelled of soil and coffee, and most days I wore the same cardigan with elbows that had gone soft from years of wear. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Then, one Thursday afternoon, the gate creaked open. I was in the backyard, knees in the dirt, trimming basil near the fence. I looked up, expecting the mailman, or maybe a neighbor needing something. But instead, I saw them, Nolan and Jade. They were dressed like they'd come from a showroom. Nolan in khaki slacks and a navy sweater, sunglasses still on his head. Jade in white pants and kitten heels, totally wrong for the gravel walkway. Her hair was pulled back tight, and she had that smirk she wore when she was trying to act casual, but was anything but. I stood slowly, brushing the dirt from my knees. I didn't know you were coming, I said. Jade smiled like she was on camera. We thought we'd surprise you. I stepped aside, unsure if I should say no. They didn't wait for an invitation. They walked past me like I was a welcome mat. Inside, Nolan opened my fridge without asking. You still buy this off-brand yogurt? He muttered, holding up the container. Jade wrinkled her nose. We'll definitely need to replace the appliances, she said to him. I blinked. We? Jade looked at me, almost sweetly. You really shouldn't be living here alone. It's dangerous. Gas stoves are a hazard at your age. At my age, they moved from room to room like real estate agents. Jade peeked into the guest room, my reading room, and then the second bedroom. She could sleep here, she said softly to Nolan, as though I wasn't standing in the hallway right behind them. Yeah, Nolan said, chuckling. Better than moving her somewhere far. I stood there frozen, my shears still in one hand. The air in the house felt thinner. When Jade turned and saw me, she didn't flinch, just smiled. We're thinking long term, she said brightly. With the kids growing, we really need the space. They led me into the kitchen like I was a client, not the homeowner. Nolan pulled out a folder. Glossy brochures spilled onto the table. Seniors playing bingo, eating pudding in pastel-colored cafeterias. This one's got great reviews, he said, tapping a brochure. On-site medical staff. 3 hot meals a day. Jade added, it's a resort, really. Spa days, gardening clubs. It'll be good for you. I didn't sit. I just stared at the brochures. I recognized one of them. It was the same place I used to take Mr. Carlton, a patient I once bathed and fed when his kids left him there to die. They handed me papers, legal ones, power of attorney, asset transfer agreements. Just sign here, just a few simple things. I didn't speak, I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I watched. I watched Jade settle into my favorite kitchen chair and cross her legs like she owned the space. I watched Nolan flip to the next page of documents, pointing out benefits and protections like I was too old to grasp a single line of text. They spoke about me like I wasn't even there, like I was already gone. That was the moment I realized I was being erased, not just from my home, but from my own life, slowly, gently, like dusting away an old photograph. They weren't trying to kill me. They just wanted to put me somewhere tidy and quiet so they could get on with their lives without the mess of my presence. I walked to the sink, turned on the water, rinsed the dirt from my hands. Let them talk, I told myself, because I wasn't done listening. That night, I sat on my porch in the dark, blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The air smelled like night jasmine and regret. The house was still, but it was no longer safe. They had touched it, entered it, measured it, not as a home, but as a transaction. I checked the lock on the gate 3 times, then laughed, not out of fear, out of something deeper, something harder. There was a time I would have signed those papers. There was a time I would have believed they were helping me, but not anymore. I thought of all the things I had done for Nolan that he no longer remembered or refused to. How I sold my only good necklace for his textbooks. How I worked 2 extra shifts to cover his broken laptop. How I walked to work for 2 months so he could have a car at college. And now, in return, he wanted my house. He wanted to tuck me away somewhere quiet so he could raise his children in peace, inside a home I paid for, with money he never asked where it came from. That's the thing about being a mother. You spend your whole life preparing your child to live without you, but no one prepares you for the moment they want to. No one tells you what it feels like when they look at you and see inconvenience instead of devotion. They hadn't taken the house, not yet, but in their minds they already had. That's what hurt most of all. They didn't think they were doing anything wrong. They thought I owed them this. And in that moment, I knew something had to change. Not in them, in me. Because once someone decides you don't matter, once they decide you're just a burden wrapped in warm memories, you either fade quietly or you rise. And I wasn't ready to disappear. The morning after they left, I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the brochures they'd forgotten to take with them. Pages curled at the corners from where Nolan had thumbed through them. Smiling seniors with plastic trays, pastel-painted rooms, group yoga for the elderly. It was supposed to look like comfort, but to me, it looked like exile wrapped in lavender walls. I didn't move for a long time, just sat there, fingers wrapped around a mug of cold coffee, watching the steam that wasn't there. My hands, these same hands that used to tie Nolan's shoelaces, hold his feverish head, bake every single birthday cake from scratch. Now they were shaking, not from fear, from restraint. Because I realized something. They didn't think they were doing anything wrong. And that's what broke something inside me. They believed it, truly, that I had reached a point in life where my only value was in how smoothly I could be removed from the picture. They thought they were being generous. It was the most insulting part of all. So I stood. Not dramatically, not with tears. I stood with quiet, deliberate purpose. And I made 2 phone calls. First, I called Mr. Aaron Fletcher, a semi-retired estate attorney who lived 2 streets over. He used to push his wife around in a wheelchair before she passed. I had once made him flan when she came home from hospice. He still remembered. When I told him what happened, he didn't interrupt. Just said, "I'll be by at 2 p.m. Bring everything." Second, I called Dr. Cara Lynn, the daughter of one of my old patients, who is now a licensed geriatric psychiatrist. She came over that same week. No clipboard, no rush, just a warm voice and clear eyes. We sat on the porch. She asked about my routines, my memory, my decision-making. I answered without hesitation. I didn't have anything to hide. My mind was sharper than ever. I read the paper every morning. I kept my checkbook balanced to the penny. I remembered exactly how many tamales I sold the last holiday season, 42 dozen, and every last one was wrapped by hand. At the end of the session, she smiled and said, "You are more competent than half the people who run businesses in this town." She mailed me a signed cognitive evaluation the next day. Mr. Fletcher took my documents, scanned them into his laptop, and asked, "Do you want to exclude your son from your will entirely?" I didn't answer right away. It wasn't anger I felt. It was clarity. "No," I said. "I want to make sure everything I own goes somewhere it'll be used with respect, not entitlement." He nodded. "We'll set up a restricted grant to a women's shelter. Something permanent. Your name will stay on the deed until you're gone. After that, it becomes theirs." I thought about that for a long time that night. This house, the one they thought I didn't deserve to own. It wasn't just a house. It was proof that I had survived, that I had endured, that I had built something when no one believed I could. And now, it would become sanctuary to women like me, women who gave and gave and gave, only to be left behind when they needed love most. It was the first time in years I felt fully awake, no longer ashamed, no longer waiting, free. I kept tending the garden like nothing had changed. I baked for the neighbors, went to Sunday service, watered my tomatoes and painted the old bench out front. But inside, I was no longer the woman who smiled through humiliation. I was preparing, just in case they came back. And of course they did. 1 week later, a knock on the door. This time it wasn't Nolan or Jade. It was a man in a gray suit holding a leather briefcase and a firm handshake. "Mrs. Parker?" he asked. I nodded. "My name is Everett Lynn. I'm a family law attorney. Your son reached out about establishing guardianship over your assets and person." I stared at him. He went on. "He claimed there were signs of confusion, that you might be showing early symptoms of dementia." The words didn't shock me. They settled in, quiet and cold, like snow on bare skin. "He said he was doing it out of concern," Everett added, then looked me straight in the eye. "But I don't take cases unless I believe they're in good faith." So I asked around. "Your neighbors?" "All of them say you're the most sharp-minded woman on this street." I didn't speak, just nodded. He handed me a card. "If he tries anything official, I want you to call me. No charge. I don't like people who use the law to steal from their mothers." After he left, I sat on the porch and watched the sun disappear behind my garden fence. This wasn't just a greedy request anymore. It was a move to erase my rights, my autonomy, my life. But they'd underestimated me, because they didn't know I'd already built the wall around my house. Not a real one, a legal one, a spiritual one that couldn't be bulldozed with signatures and slick smiles. This was no longer about holding on to a house. It was about holding on to myself. That night, I wrote 3 letters, one to the shelter, one to my lawyer, and one I burned, addressed to Nolan but never meant to be sent. Inside it, I wrote, "I gave you everything. You gave me nothing back but the quiet insult of forgetting who I am. I am no longer asking to be seen. I see myself now, and I will not disappear." And for the first time in years, I slept straight through the night. No regrets, no doubt, just calm. Because I wasn't waiting to be rescued. I had finally decided to rescue myself. They came back on a Sunday. Of course they did. People like Nolan don't like silence. They only tolerate it when it means control. But when the silence stretches too long, when they start to feel out of the loop, that's when they come knocking. This time, it was a full production. Jade wore a pale pink sweater, soft makeup, no jewelry. Nolan had on that navy sweater he always saved for family photos. Even their 2 children came along, each holding a small gift box. Construction paper, cards, something made of clay. They looked like the poster family for thoughtful love. I saw it for what it was, a performance, an ambush in polite clothing. I'd already set the kettle on before they even reached the door. Nolan leaned in for a kiss on the cheek like the last conversation hadn't happened. "Mama," he said, all warm tones and fake nostalgia. "We brought lunch. We thought it'd be nice to eat together, just us." I smiled. Of course. The kids handed me their gifts. I accepted them gently. None of this was their fault. They didn't know what part they were playing. We sat down, sandwiches, salad, store-bought pie. Nolan poured me a glass of lemonade like he was still my little boy trying to make up for a broken vase. Jade smiled too much. That kind of smile where the lips stretch, but the eyes stay still. "Selena," she began sweetly, "we've been thinking more about what we talked about last time. We really want what's best for you." I tilted my head. "What happened last time?" Nolan cleared his throat. "You forgot to turn off the gas. Remember? The neighbor had to come tell you." A lie. No such thing had ever happened. Jade jumped in, concerned and composed. "And that bruise on your arm from the fall in the bathroom, remember that?" Another lie. I wore short sleeves that day for a reason. My arms were spotless. He reached into his satchel, just like before, and pulled out the folder. This time it was even thicker. Tabs, color-coded sections, notarized copies. It wasn't just a suggestion anymore. It was a full-scale takeover. "We've prepared everything," Nolan said, tapping the pen against the edge of the document. "The transfer of assets, power of attorney, the arrangements with the senior residents. It's a great place. Safe, clean. They even have a spa." Jade added, "Gardening programs, book clubs. It's like a resort." I nodded slowly and sipped my lemonade. My hands were steady, my face calm. Then I set the glass down, opened the drawer beside the fridge, and pulled out a large manila envelope. They watched me, puzzled but not yet alarmed. I opened it slowly and laid the contents out on the table, one by one. First, the signed, dated cognitive evaluation from Dr. Kara Lynn. Full mental capacity, no signs of impairment. Second, a notarized letter from attorney Aaron Fletcher, outlining in legal language Nolan Parker's attempt to gain control over a mentally competent adult's assets through fabricated claims. Third, a USB drive. I plugged it into my kitchen laptop and clicked one vein nasal. The audio recording from their last visit began to play. Jade's voice echoed across the room. She could sleep here, like a housekeeper, but family. Nolan's voice followed. "Better than moving her somewhere far." Jade's breath caught. Nolan sat back, his face pale. I clicked pause, let the silence do the talking. Then the front door opened. Aaron stepped in, calm and firm, a leather folder under his arm. "Nolan Parker," he said evenly, "you are being served with a cease and desist for attempted financial exploitation and elder manipulation." Nolan stood. "This is insane." Aaron raised a hand. "Don't speak unless you want this documented too. Everything you've done has been recorded, and if you continue any further contact with the intent to coerce or mislead your mother, legal proceedings will begin. Criminal ones." Jade stood so fast she nearly knocked over her chair. "She doesn't know what she's doing. She's being manipulated." I looked at her, then at Nolan, and I said, slowly and clearly, "I'm not your burden. I'm not your retirement plan, and I'm certainly not your victim." The words landed, not like thunder, but like iron dropped into still water, heavy, undeniable. Aaron handed me one more document, the finalized transfer of my home upon my death to the Women's Shelter of North Florida, a place for women like me, who gave and gave and gave until there was nothing left. Nolan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at the kids, at Jade, then at me, and I saw it. Not guilt, not remorse. Panic. Because for the first time in his life, I wasn't bending. I wasn't backing down. He gathered the folder quickly, muttering something about lawyers and just trying to help. Jade didn't speak. She just stormed past me, the heels of her expensive shoes catching gravel all the way down the path. Aaron followed them out. The kids waved goodbye. I waved back gently. When the door shut behind them, I didn't collapse. I didn't cry. I poured myself a fresh cup of tea. I looked around my kitchen, my home, and I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped losing. No screaming, no revenge. Just quiet, legal, permanent, And from that moment on, the house no longer felt like something I needed to protect. It felt like mine, truly mine, for the first time since I bought it. Not because of the deed, but because of the boundary I finally set, the line I finally drew. And for a woman who spent her life giving, setting that line, quiet as it was the loudest thing I'd ever done. 6 months passed, just like that. The tomatoes in the garden grew taller than I expected. I planted rosemary near the fence, then added 2 rows of wildflowers from a neighbor's cutting. The air in my backyard smelled like earth, mint, and something new, something clean. I didn't think about Nolan and Jade every day anymore. I didn't check the lock on the gate 3 times a night. The tension in my shoulders, that old friend that used to ride with me everywhere, I hadn't felt it in weeks. The legal cease and desist held. Nolan never came back. Jade didn't send any more emails. Silence finally returned, but this time it didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like peace. A few weeks after everything settled, Aaron, my lawyer, called. "They took the deal," he said. "No contest, no appeal, just walked away." There was a condition. Nolan would have to do 180 hours of community service at a senior care facility, no less. Push wheelchairs, serve food, fold laundry. He'd be working beside women like the one he tried to erase. Maybe he'd learn something, maybe not. "That's the best outcome for everyone," Aaron said. "I agree," I told him, "especially the grandchildren." It wasn't about punishment. It was about boundaries. It was about reminding him that I existed outside of what he wanted from me. Word got out in the neighborhood, not through gossip, but in whispers exchanged at church picnics and waiting rooms. One woman I barely knew knocked on my gate holding a pie. Her son had opened credit cards in her name. Another came with tears in her eyes and a folder of bank statements. She just wanted to know where to start. I didn't have all the answers, but I gave what I could. Phone numbers, advice, the name of a kind lawyer, the reminder that no is a full sentence, even if it comes late in life. Some women brought flan, some brought flowers. One just sat with me and held my hand for 10 full minutes without saying a word. It was enough. And then there was the letter, handwritten in a shaky mix of cursive and marker. A child's hand. It came in a plain envelope with no return address. "Dear Grandma, I'm sorry for what happened. Mommy said we can't visit, but I hope when I'm older, I can come see your garden. Love, Maison Chamals." I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into my recipe box, right between the flan recipe and the one for pumpkin bread Nolan used to ask for when he was sick. The door would always be there, but only for those who knock gently. I updated my will with Aaron a few weeks later. The house, the land, and every last penny in my small account would go to the Women's Shelter of North Florida, earmarked for transitional housing, a place where women, especially older women, could land when the people they trusted most let them fall. Aaron looked over the papers and said, "That's a powerful legacy." I shook my head. It's not power, it's clarity. When I die, I don't want my life to be measured in savings or square footage. I want it to be measured in women who said enough and found peace in saying it. And for now, I wake up without dread. I eat my breakfast without checking the window. I prune the roses without wondering if someone's planning to steal them from me. Some days I still hear Nolan's laugh in my memory, young, full of joy, back when I was still everything to him. It stings. But it doesn't undo me, because now I am everything to myself, and that is more than I ever thought I could be. One afternoon, I sat on the edge of my flower bed with a soft hat and old garden gloves. My knees creaked. My fingers trembled a bit, but my back was straight. I wasn't strong because I fought. I was strong because I endured, and because I finally knew how to stop giving myself away. The garden doesn't ask for more than I can give. It blooms anyway. Some days, I think maybe I'm like that too. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had someone act like you were invisible after everything you did for them? Have you ever felt erased, but chose to rise quietly on your own terms? Tell me in the comments. You're not alone, not anymore.